first chill of October had settled over Willow Creek, the kind that made the maple leaves along Main Street curl at their edges and drift lazily onto cracked sidewalks. The air had that crisp wood smoke tang, the kind that wrapped around you as soon as you stepped outside, promising winter wasn't far behind. From the library's front windows, I could see the last of the afternoon sun slanting low over the courthouse, bathing the red bricks in amber light. I stood behind the circulation desk, stamping the date on the inside covers of paperbacks, while the soft hum of the heater filled the silence. Only 3 patrons had wandered in all day. Mrs. Donnelly, who read romance novels faster than anyone in town, old Mr. Harris, who always asked for books about trains, and a high school boy whose earbuds never left his ears. It was a slow Tuesday, the kind that made the hours feel longer than they were. Jack hadn't called. Not that he usually did, he wasn't much of a phone person. But lately, I'd been noticing how many evenings passed without a real conversation between us. We'd exchange a few words over coffee in the morning, mostly about bills, the weather, or what needed fixing around the house, and then he'd be gone before the sun cleared the trees. When I'd ask how his day had gone, he'd say, "Busy," with a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself it was just the season. Fall was when work at the wood shop picked up. Everyone wanted their repairs done before winter set in, and Jack had always been proud of never missing a deadline. Still, the distance between us had begun to feel heavier. Not angry or cold, just a quiet space where laughter used to be. By the time I locked up the library and stepped into the dimming street, the air had dropped a few degrees. The street lamps flickered on, throwing little halos of light onto the sidewalk. My breath puffed out in small clouds as I walked toward the truck, the sound of dry leaves scraping across the pavement following me. On the drive home, the radio murmured soft country ballads, but I barely heard them. I passed the corner diner where we used to stop on Friday nights for pie. Jack always ordered cherry. I preferred lemon meringue, and the sight of the neon sign made something in my chest tighten. Those nights felt like they belonged to another lifetime. Our house sat at the end of Miller Lane, a squat, weathered place with peeling paint and a front porch that leaned ever so slightly to the left. The porch light was off when I pulled into the gravel drive. Jack's truck wasn't there. I wasn't surprised. Lately, he'd been working late, saying the orders were piling up. Sometimes I wondered if he stayed late just to be alone. Inside, the house smelled faintly of the chili I'd made the night before. I reheated a bowl, ate it standing at the counter, then wandered into the living room. The couch sagged in the middle. The TV remote was exactly where Jack had left it, and the silence felt too loud. My eyes drifted to the photograph on the mantel. Our wedding day, me in a simple white dress, Jack in a borrowed suit, both of us grinning like fools. That day, we'd believed we could handle anything as long as we had each other. Now, I wasn't so sure. Around 8, I found myself staring at the phone, thumb hovering over Jack's contact. I didn't want to nag, I didn't want to sound needy, but the truth was, I missed him. Missed the way he used to tell me about the grain of a certain wood he'd worked with, or how he'd laugh when I brought him coffee in the middle of sanding a cabinet. My gaze landed on the mason jar by the window, filled with wildflowers that had long since dried. Jack had picked them one morning last summer, leaving them on the kitchen table with a note. "Thought you'd like these." I'd saved them because I didn't want to forget the kind of man who'd thought to stop by the side of the road just to bring me something beautiful. I set down my mug. Without really deciding, I grabbed my coat from the hook and my keys from the counter. The road to the shop wound past dark fields and clusters of trees that whispered in the breeze. I knew the way by heart. The workshop sat on the edge of town, a low building with a single wide bay door and a small office attached to the side. The smell hit me before I even stepped out of the truck. Fresh-cut pine, varnish, and that warm, earthy scent of sawdust that clung to everything Jack touched. Through the bay's open door, I could see him, and he was bent over a workbench, sleeves rolled to the elbow, sawdust clinging to his hair. The lamplight cast long shadows across the floor, and the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper filled the space. For a moment I just stood there, watching him. He looked steady, focused, and so far away. "Jack!" my voice echoed softly in the cavern of the shop. He straightened, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Claire, what are you doing here? I thought I'd bring you some dinner." I held up the paper bag I'd grabbed from the diner on the way. "Figured you might not have eaten yet." A slow smile spread across his face, the kind that warmed the edges of my worry. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said, stepping inside, "but I wanted to." He wiped his hands on a rag and motioned toward the small office in the corner. "Come on in, it's warmer in there." The office was little more than 4 walls lined with shelves of varnish cans, jars of nails, and coffee mugs that had seen better days. A tiny space heater hummed in the corner, fighting the chill that seeped in through the thin walls. Jack cleared a stack of sandpaper from the desk so I could set down the bag. "I got you a roast beef sandwich and some fries," I said, pulling out the wrapped bundle. "And coffee. The good kind, not the stuff you make here." He chuckled, low and tired, but there was a spark in it that I hadn't heard in a while. "You always know what I need." "Years of practice," I said, sliding the coffee toward him. He took a sip, eyes closing briefly in appreciation. "God, that's good." Then he looked at me, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time in weeks. "I'm sorry I've been so buried in work. I know I haven't been around much." I shrugged, trying to keep it light. "You're keeping the town in furniture. Someone's got to do it." But inside, my chest ached. I didn't want him to feel guilty. I just wanted him back in that quiet, everyday way we used to have. We ate mostly in silence, the sound of the wind rattling the shop's tin roof above us. Every now and then, his knee brushed mine under the desk, and it was enough to make my throat tighten. I'd forgotten how much I missed the simple weight of his presence. When the food was gone, Jack leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said slowly, "I still remember the first night you came to the shop. You brought me coffee and sat in that exact chair, reading while I worked. I thought, this is it. This is the girl I'm gonna marry." I felt my lips curve into a smile. "You never told me that. Guess I'm telling you now." The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, the world was dark and still, except for the faint glow of the street lamp at the edge of the lot. Inside, the lamplight softened the lines of his face, made the flecks of sawdust in his hair look like they belonged there. "I should probably finish this job," he said reluctantly, glancing toward the half-sanded tabletop in the bay. "But maybe you could stick around a while?" "Of course," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. So I did. I sat on the old stool near his bench, hands wrapped around my coffee, watching the way his shoulders moved as he worked, the precision of his fingers as they guided the sandpaper. Every now and then, he'd glance over, and our eyes would meet for just a second too long. It wasn't fireworks, it wasn't grand gestures, but in that sawdust-scented space, I felt the smallest thread between us pull taut again, like it was reminding us it had never really broken. When he finally set the tabletop aside and turned off the light above his bench, the shop seemed suddenly quiet, almost intimate in its stillness. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, and we walked out together into the crisp night. The stars were sharp against the dark sky, and our breath curled like smoke in the cold air. Without thinking, Jack reached for my hand. His palm was rough, warm, and it fit against mine the way it always had, like it was meant to. We didn't say much on the walk to the truck. We didn't need to. The gravel crunched under our boots, and the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full. As we drove home, the diner's neon sign glowed in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, I thought maybe we could find our way back to that place where laughter came easy and nights felt like they belonged to us. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I wasn't going to let that go without a fight. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the faint hiss of the old percolator in the kitchen. For a moment, I lay still, letting the sound wrap around me. Jack always made the coffee stronger than I liked, but I didn't mind. It was one of those little things, like the way he left his boots by the door, or how he hummed under his breath when he was concentrating, that made the house feel alive. When I padded into the kitchen, he was standing at the counter, hair still damp from the shower, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. He glanced up, and a quick smile flickered across his face. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I reached for the sugar, adding 2 spoonfuls to my cup. We moved around each other in that familiar dance of morning routine. No words, just the quiet choreography of shared space. It struck me, as I leaned against the counter, how different this felt from when we first met. Back then, every glance between us had been charged with something new, something electric. I wondered how long it had been since I'd felt that exact kind of pull, and that thought sent me drifting back, unspooling a memory I hadn't touched in a while. It was late spring 6 years ago. Willow Creek had just shaken off winter's chill, and the air was thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth and blooming lilacs. I'd been working at the library for only a few months when the front door opened one Thursday afternoon and a man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, with a streak of sawdust across his dark t-shirt like he'd just stepped out of a workshop. He came up to the desk, hat in his hand. "Hey," he said, voice deep and steady. "You got anything on wood joinery?" I blinked at him, partly because he was striking in that unpolished way, partly because I had to dig through my brain to remember which shelf held the woodworking books. "Yeah, I think so. Follow me." As we walked between the stacks, I caught a whiff of cedar clinging to him, and for reasons I couldn't explain, it made my heart beat just a little faster. He picked a book off the shelf and flipped through it, nodding. "This'll work. I'm fixing up an old dining table." I smiled. "For yourself?" "For my sister. She's getting married next month. Thought she could use something solid to start out with." I remember thinking that was one of the kindest things I'd heard in a long time. A week later, he was back, this time for a book on cabinet making, then another visit for something about finishing techniques. By the 3rd time, I started to wonder if he was really there for the books, or if maybe he was there for the librarian who found them for him. One rainy evening in June, just before closing, he walked in again. "Got a minute?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sure," I said, leaning against the desk. "I was thinking," he began, almost shyly, "maybe you'd want to grab coffee sometime. There's a little diner over on Main. Best cherry pie in town." It wasn't a flashy invitation, but there was something so earnest about it that I found myself saying yes before I'd even thought it through. That first coffee turned into 3 hours of talking about everything from childhood pets to favorite movies. Jack told me about the summer he'd built his first workbench at 15, about how he loved the feeling of turning raw lumber into something that could last a lifetime. I told him about growing up in Willow Creek, about my mother's habit of collecting teacups from thrift stores. By the time we left the diner, the streets were slick with rain, and he walked me to my car, holding his jacket over my head. It wasn't until later that night, lying in bed, that I realized I'd been smiling the whole drive home. Back in the kitchen, I looked across the table at the man who'd once felt like a revelation, who still wore that same quiet steadiness. The coffee steamed between us, and the morning light caught in the lines at the corners of his eyes. "You're quiet today?" he said, breaking into my thoughts. "Just thinking," I answered. "About what?" I hesitated. "About how we met." His lips curved into that slow grin that had once undone me completely. "I remember that. You acted like you didn't notice me." "I did not," I protested, laughing. "You did," he said, shaking his head. But I noticed you. For the first time in weeks, the space between us felt less like distance and more like something we could cross if we just kept talking. By Thursday afternoon, the wind had picked up, rattling the bare branches outside the library windows. A thin veil of gray cloud hung over Willow Creek, the kind that hinted at rain without committing to it. I stacked the last of the returned books onto the cart and checked the clock. Half an hour until closing. All day a thought had been circling in my mind like a bird looking for a place to land. We need more nights like Tuesday. The evening at Jack's shop had stayed with me. Not just the way his hand felt in mine, but the way we'd fallen into easy conversation without forcing it. It reminded me of us before the quiet distance crept in. So I made a decision. Tomorrow was Friday. Jack usually worked late to finish up the week's orders, which meant he wouldn't expect me at the shop. I'd pack up his favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes, and bring it to him, along with that lemon meringue pie he used to tease me about hoarding for myself. I'd wear that green sweater he once said brought out my eyes, and maybe, just maybe, we could stretch that thread between us a little tighter. By the time I drove home, I'd already made a grocery list in my head. The kitchen light felt warm when I stepped inside, and for the first time in weeks, I moved with a little energy, setting out the pot roast from the freezer to thaw, pulling flour and sugar from the pantry for the pie crust. There was something soothing about the sound of the whisk against the bowl, the smell of lemon zest curling through the air. The next morning, I stopped by Harper's Market for fresh potatoes and cream. Mrs. Henderson, the clerk who'd been behind the register since I was a teenager, gave me a knowing look. "Special dinner?" she asked, ringing up the items. "Something like that," I said with a small smile. "Well, you tell Jack I said he's a lucky man." I promised I would, though I wasn't sure he always felt that way lately. By late afternoon, the house smelled rich and savory, the pot roast simmering low in the oven, the pie cooled on the counter, its golden meringue peaks catching the fading sunlight. I packed everything into a picnic basket, lined with a thick towel to keep the heat in, then grabbed my sweater from the hook by the door. But when I pulled into the lot outside the wood shop, the first thing I noticed was how dark it was. The bay door was closed, and the only light came from the small window of the office. My stomach sank a little. I got out, balancing the basket on my hip, and knocked on the office door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Jack?" My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. Not to Jack, but to a younger guy I didn't recognize, wearing a baseball cap and a t-shirt smeared with paint. "Hey," he said, "you looking for Jack?" "Yes, is he here?" The guy shook his head. "He left about an hour ago. Said he had to go pick up some supplies over in Pine Hollow. Might not be back tonight." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "Right, thanks." Back in the truck, the basket sat beside me like a reminder of my own foolish hope. I could drive the 30 miles to Pine Hollow, but something about chasing him down felt wrong, like pressing when I should be giving space. So instead, I drove home slowly, the sky deepening to indigo above the fields. The house felt too quiet when I stepped inside, the smell of pot roast now bittersweet. I unpacked the basket, set a plate for myself, and ate alone at the kitchen table. Halfway through my meal, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A minute later, the front door opened, and Jack stepped in, dusted with road grit, looking surprised to see me at the table. "Hey," he said. "I didn't think you'd still be up." "I was waiting," I admitted. "I stopped by the shop earlier." His brow furrowed. "You did?" "Sorry, I had to run to Pine Hollow for a shipment of oak. The supplier was closing early." "It's fine," I said, forcing a small smile. "I'll just pack you a plate." But inside, something tightened, because I couldn't shake the feeling that we were always missing each other, even when we were in the same room. That night, after Jack had eaten and showered, we sat in the living room with the TV on low. Some home renovation show played in the background, people tearing down walls, building their dream kitchens, but neither of us was really watching. Jack leaned back in his recliner, one leg stretched out, absently rubbing the back of his neck. I curled up on the couch with a blanket, my mind still stuck on the empty woodshop and the basket cooling on the passenger seat. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, "I made this for you. I went out of my way because I miss you. I need you to meet me halfway." But the words stayed pressed between my ribs, too big to push out without breaking something open. "Long day?" I asked instead. "Yeah," he said, eyes still on the TV. "Road to Pine Hollow was a mess. Construction on the bridge. Took forever." I nodded, twisting the edge of the blanket in my fingers. "Did you get everything you needed?" "Mostly. Still short a few boards for the Dawson job. I'll have to make another trip next week." Another trip. Another night without him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. After the show ended, Jack clicked off the TV and said he was turning in. I stayed on the couch a while longer, listening to the creak of the floorboards upstairs, the water running in the bathroom. The house felt too big, too empty for two people who were supposed to be building a life together. When I finally climbed into bed, Jack was already asleep, one arm flung across the pillow. I lay on my side, facing him, studying the curve of his shoulder under the blanket. I reached out, just for a second, but stopped short, letting my hand fall back to my side. It wasn't that I didn't want to touch him. It was that I wasn't sure he'd reach back. The next morning, the sky was washed in pale gold, a thin fog clinging to the fields. I got ready for work quietly, moving around the kitchen so I wouldn't wake him. As I poured coffee into my travel mug, I noticed the pie on the counter, still under its glass dome, untouched. I left it there. Maybe he'd have a slice later, maybe he wouldn't. At the library, I tried to lose myself in shelving books and helping patrons, but my mind kept drifting. A woman came in with her little boy, and as they left, I caught the boy's hand tugging at hers, asking if they could stop for ice cream. She laughed and said yes without hesitation, bending to kiss the top of his head. It was such a small gesture, but it hit me hard, how love wasn't always grand declarations, but choosing someone over and over, even in the smallest ways. I thought about how often Jack and I had done that in the early years, how he'd drive 20 minutes out of his way to bring me lunch at the library, how I'd stay up late just to keep him company when he was finishing a job. Somewhere along the line, those little choices had thinned out, replaced by the grind of bills, deadlines, and exhaustion. That evening, Jack didn't come straight home. I heard his truck pulling close to 9. When he stepped inside, he looked worn down, dark smudges under his eyes, his hair damp from a quick rinse at the shop's sink. "Hey," he said, hanging his jacket on the hook. "Hey," I echoed from where I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. He glanced at the pie, then at me. "You made that the other day?" I nodded. "Yeah." He hesitated, then walked over and cut a slice. Took a bite. "It's good," he said, around a mouthful. Something about the simplicity of it, the way he finally tasted what I'd made days later, made my chest ache. I wasn't sure if it was relief or sadness. Later, as we got ready for bed, I caught him looking at me in the mirror, his expression unreadable. "Claire," he said, "you okay?" It was such a simple question. I could have told him the truth, that I was lonely, that I missed him, that I felt like we were slowly turning into strangers. Instead, I said, "Yeah, just tired." He didn't press. Maybe he was tired too. We turned out the lights, and in the dark, I thought about all the things we weren't saying. They sat between us like a third presence in the room, quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment to demand attention. It was a Thursday evening when the call came. I was closing up the library, flipping the open sign to closed, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Jack's name lit up the screen. "Claire," he said when I answered, his voice rough. "I'm fine, don't worry, but the power's out at the shop. I've got to stay here a while, make sure nothing gets damaged. Thought you might want to come by. I could use an extra set of hands." It wasn't like him to ask for help. Usually he handled everything himself, grumbling if I so much as offered to carry a box. That's how I knew something was off. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot, the sun had dipped low. the last streaks of orange fading behind the tree line. The woodshop sat in semi-darkness, lit only by the weak glow of a battery lantern inside. Jack stood near the workbench, sleeves rolled up, sawdust clinging to his jeans. "Breaker tripped?" I asked, stepping inside. "Whole block's out," he said. "Transformer blew. Won't be back on till morning." The air smelled like pine and varnish, warm and earthy. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the lantern and the occasional creak of settling wood. We set to work covering half-finished projects with tarps, stacking tools neatly so nothing would get misplaced in the dark. At one point I reached for a plank the same moment Jack did, and our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away right away. The contact was brief, but it sent a strange jolt through me, like touching something you didn't realize you'd missed until it was gone. After we'd secured everything, there wasn't much left to do. Jack pulled up 2 stools at the workbench, poured us each a cup of coffee from his thermos. We sat there in the lantern glow, the shop smelling of cedar and black coffee, shadows stretching long on the floor. "It's been a while since you've been down here," he said quietly. "Yeah," I admitted. "Feels different, quieter." He nodded, staring into his cup. "Sometimes I forget how much I like it when you're around. I just get caught up." I wanted to say me too. Instead, I asked, "Do you ever think about before? When we used to stay up late here, sanding and talking until the sun came up?" A small smile tugged at his mouth. "I think about it all the time." We didn't touch. We didn't fix anything in that moment. But sitting there in the half-light, I felt something shift, like the first crack in a frozen lake, small but deep enough to let water move again. When the coffee was gone, we packed up. As we stepped outside, the night was cool and quiet, the stars sharp against the black sky. Jack looked over at me, hands in his pockets. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Would have been a long night alone." I smiled, though my heart felt heavy. I know the feeling. The next Saturday, the clouds rolled in before noon. I'd been at the farmer's market, half listening to a vendor explain the difference between clover and wildflower honey, when the first low rumble of thunder swept across the sky. By the time I made it back to my car, fat drops were splattering the windshield. Jack called just as I was pulling out of the lot. "You still in town?" he asked. "Yeah, why?" "Storm's coming in faster than they said. I was headed to Miller's Supply to grab some boards, but my truck's acting up. Mind swinging by? I'll pay for gas." I almost said no. The thought of getting caught in the rain with him, just the 2 of us, felt like stepping too close to something I couldn't control. But something in his voice, a little rushed, a little off balance, made me say, "I'm on my way." I found him standing under the overhang of a shuttered feed store, jacket zipped up, hair already damp. He climbed into the passenger seat with a gust of wet, pine-scented air. "Thanks," he said, shaking the rain from his sleeves. "Where to?" "Out toward Old Creek. Supply shop's on the corner past the bridge." The rain thickened as we drove, turning the road shiny black. The wipers thumped back and forth, struggling to keep up. Conversation came in fits. Small talk about the weather, a passing comment about a mutual friend, but underneath it, I could feel the silence stretching, dense and charged. Halfway across the bridge, the rain became a sheet, blurring everything but the headlights on the opposite side. Jack leaned forward, peering through the glass. "Pull over," he said. "It's too bad to see." We eased onto the shoulder just before the road curved into the trees. The sound of the storm surrounded us, water drumming the roof, wind rattling the side mirrors. Inside the cab, it felt like we were suspended in a bubble of dim light and breath. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Jack shifted, his knee brushing mine. Not a deliberate touch, but he didn't move away. I could feel the warmth of him through the denim, even in the chill air. "I hate storms like this," I said finally. "Feels like you're cut off from the world." "Maybe that's not always a bad thing," he murmured. His eyes met mine in the reflection of the windshield, brief, but enough to knock the breath out of me. The air between us seemed to tilt, like we were standing on the edge of something too high to climb down from. A flash of lightning lit the cab, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled my teeth. Instinctively, I flinched, and Jack's hand found mine, just for a second, just long enough to squeeze, as if to say I'm here. Then the rain softened, the world outside slowly reappearing in shades of gray. Jack cleared his throat. Road should be passable now. We didn't mention the hand-holding. We didn't have to. The space between us hummed all the way to the supply shop. 2 days later, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp, the way it only gets in early fall. I was sweeping the front porch when I saw Jack's truck crawl down the road, slow enough to make the loose gravel crunch in drawn-out bursts. He pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and sat there for a beat before stepping out. "Got a minute?" he asked, resting one hand on the doorframe. "Sure. Coffee?" He nodded, following me inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. I poured 2 mugs, sliding his across the counter, and he didn't sit, just leaned against the cabinet, watching me. There was something in his eyes, not the easy banter from before, but a quiet weight. "That storm the other day," he said finally. "I've been thinking about it." I busied myself with rearranging the sugar jar. "About what?" "That moment on the bridge, He stopped, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Never mind." The air thickened. My mind flashed back to the press of his knee against mine, his fingers closing over mine in the half-dark. My pulse picked up, loud enough I was sure he could hear. "You can say it, Jack," I said, softer than I meant to. He met my gaze, and for a second I thought he might. His mouth even started to form the first word, but then he shook his head, letting out a breath that sounded like surrender. "Just glad you were there," he said instead. We drank our coffee in silence, the kind that fills every corner of a room and leaves no safe place to hide. When he left, he lingered on the porch, his hand resting on the railing like he was waiting for something. Maybe for me to say the thing he couldn't. I didn't, and as his truck rumbled away, I wasn't sure if I felt relief or regret. 2 weeks later, a call from the county office pulled me out of my Saturday morning routine. They needed someone to help check a boundary marker deep in the North Woods. A temporary fix until the official survey team could come next week. My usual partner was out sick. The replacement? Jack. When I arrived at the ranger station, he was leaning against the hood of his truck, a thermos in hand. "Guess it's you and me," he said with that half-smile that always seemed to mean more than it said. We loaded gear into his truck, maps, markers, a battered toolbox, and hit the dirt road. The weather was brisk but bright, the leaves already turning amber and crimson. Jack kept the window cracked, letting the cold air in, his arm resting easily on the sill. About halfway there, the road narrowed and dipped. A fallen pine blocked our way, too big to move. Jack killed the engine. "We walk from here, 4 miles, give or take." The woods felt different away from the road, quiet in a way that made every twig snap sound like a secret. We talked about nothing at first, the change in hunting regulations, a new diner that had opened in town, but the deeper we went, the easier the words came, like we were walking back into a place we'd both been before. When we found the marker, it was tilted, half buried in wet soil. Jack knelt beside it, working the wrench while I steadied the post. Our hands brushed, brief, but enough to make me aware of every inch of space between us. On the way back, clouds began rolling in, flattening the light. We were still 2 miles from the truck when the first drops fell. It wasn't a downpour, just a steady, soaking rain that darkened our jackets and clung to our skin. Jack offered me his flannel shirt, insisting he wasn't cold. I took it, the fabric warm from his body, smelling faintly of cedar and something I couldn't name. By the time we reached the truck, we were both drenched and laughing in that breathless, unplanned way that feels like a secret no one else could understand. By the time we made it back to the truck, the rain had turned steady and cold, the kind that seeps under your collar no matter how tight you pull it. Jack tried the ignition. Nothing. He cursed softly under his breath, popped the hood, and disappeared into the curtain of drizzle. After a few minutes of tinkering, he slammed it shut. Battery's dead. We must have left the dome light on when we unloaded. He glanced at the sky, already dimming under the weight of the clouds. We're not walking out in this. The ranger station was 10 miles away, and there was no cell signal this far north. Jack suggested we try the old fire watch cabin about a mile down a side trail. It wasn't much, but it had a roof and a wood stove. We grabbed what gear we could carry and headed into the trees. The trail was muddy, the kind that pulls at your boots and makes every step feel heavier. My hands were numb by the time the cabin came into view, just a squat silhouette against the dripping forest. Jack pushed the door open, and the smell of old wood and dust spilled out. Inside, it was dark except for the pale rectangle of the doorway. Jack found a box of matches, lit a lamp, and set to work building a fire. The stove clanged and popped as the wood caught. Slowly, the chill began to lift. I peeled off my soaked jacket and draped it over a chair near the heat. Jack handed me a chipped enamel mug filled with hot water from his thermos. Not coffee, but it'll warm you up. We sat across from each other, steam curling from the mugs, rain still whispering against the roof. For the first time all day, there was nothing to do, no road to clear, no marker to fix, just the quiet of the cabin and the hum of the fire. The longer we sat there, the more I noticed the faint scar on Jack's chin, the way his lashes caught the lamplight, the quiet steadiness in the way he looked at me. It wasn't just the fire that made the air between us feel warmer. "Guess we're stuck here tonight," he said finally, voice low. "Guess so," I replied, though part of me wondered if it was the rain or fate that had led us here. The fire had burned down to a low, steady glow, the kind that fills a small space with more shadows than light. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. It drummed on the roof in a steady rhythm like it was marking time for something we couldn't name. Jack rummaged in his pack, pulling out 2 blankets. "They're not much," he said, "but better than nothing." He handed me one, then spread the other out on the floor near the stove. I could feel the warmth of the fire at my back, the cold of the night pressing at the windows, and, somewhere in between, the weight of the moment settling in. We talked for a while about nothing, about the stubborn truck, the worst storms we'd each been caught in, the way this part of Montana felt both forgotten and eternal. His voice had that low, even tone that made me want to listen longer than the stories themselves required. At some point, he noticed my hands were still cold and reached across to take one in his. His palm was rough, warm, and steady. "You'll never get warm holding that mug like it's a shield," he teased gently. I didn't pull away. There was a long pause after that, the kind where every creak of the wood, every pop of the fire feels magnified. I could sense him watching me, not in the casual way people glance at each other, but with a focus that felt almost too much, like he was memorizing me in this exact moment. "You know," he said quietly, "you're not like I remembered." I looked up. "Remembered?" "From before, years back, at the fall festival. You were with your dad near the pie contest table." He smiled faintly. "I noticed you even then." The memory hit like a spark. I did remember him, though back then he was just a tall boy helping set up hay bales, someone I glanced at once and never thought I'd see again. The wind picked up outside, and the lamp flickered. The cabin felt even smaller, the air warmer, heavier. Jack shifted closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough that the space between us felt charged. "We'll be fine here tonight," he said, but there was something in his voice that made me think he wasn't just talking about the weather. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to, just that, for the first time in a long time, I didn't want the night to end. The rain softened sometime after midnight, turning from a steady percussion to a faint hiss against the cabin roof. Inside, the fire had sunk into embers, casting a low orange light that seemed to slow everything down. Jack was leaning back against the wall, one knee bent, hands loosely clasped. I'd taken the blanket he'd given me and pulled it around my shoulders. But the heat wasn't just from the wool. It was from the closeness, the way every move he made seemed to reach across the small space and touch me somehow. For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers. It was the kind of stillness that comes when the air is too full to risk spilling it with careless words. My mind kept circling back to that single sentence he'd said earlier. "You're not like I remembered." It was dangerous, the way it lodged itself in me. Finally, Jack broke the quiet. "I used to think small towns had a way of making you forget things. Turns out they just bury them until they decide you're ready to see them again." I looked over at him. "And you think I'm one of those things?" His gaze met mine without hesitation. "Yeah, maybe the main one." The fire popped. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked in the woods. But inside that cabin, everything felt suspended, like the whole night was leaning in to see what we would do next. I felt my breath catch, and I didn't know if it was from the chill creeping in through the window frame or from the way he was looking at me, steady, unblinking, as if I'd been a question he'd been trying to answer for years. "I'm not sure I'm the same person you remember," I murmured. "That's fine," he said. "Neither am I." We stayed like that, eyes locked, until the silence stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a bridge. I shifted closer, just a fraction, and he didn't move away. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Then he reached out, slowly, like giving me the chance to stop him. I didn't, and just like that, the space between us was gone. The moment his hand touched mine, it was like the air shifted. Not louder, not brighter, just sharper. Jack's palm was warm, the kind of warmth that traveled through skin and into bone. I could feel the calluses, the faint roughness from years of work, and something about that grounded me, kept me from drifting into the storm of my own thoughts. We didn't speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and the wrong words could shatter it. The fire's light painted the side of his face in amber, shadowing the other half. I'd forgotten how steady his eyes could be, even back when we were younger, before life got complicated. They weren't intense in the way that burns. They were the kind that held. He tilted his head just slightly. "You remember that night?" I didn't have to ask which one. My pulse already knew. "It was cold," I said softly. "Colder than tonight. I was afraid we'd never find our way back to camp." Jack smiled faintly, but there was something behind it. Something that pulled at the edges of his expression. I wasn't afraid. Not then. I just didn't want it to end. That admission pressed against something deep in me. For a moment I saw it, the way we'd been, two kids stumbling into a night they didn't know would follow them for years. The wind rattled the window frame. Somewhere outside, the rain started again, soft but persistent. Jack's thumb brushed over the back of my hand. "You ever wonder if we'd done things differently?" "All the time," I whispered. We weren't leaning toward each other, not yet, but the space between us had become something fragile, something I wasn't sure could hold for much longer. "Savannah," he said, quietly, like the word might break in his mouth if he wasn't careful. "Yes?" But he didn't answer right away. He just looked at me in that long, unhurried way that made the room feel smaller and the night feel endless. And then, only then, he leaned in. Not enough to erase the distance, but enough that the promise of it felt like a weight between us, the kind you can't ignore. The moment hung there, a breath suspended between us. I could hear the rain tracing the glass, the soft tick of the old clock above the kitchen doorway, and somewhere in my chest, the restless drum of my own heartbeat. Jack didn't move closer. He didn't pull away either. That was the thing about him. He knew when to push and he knew when to wait. I swallowed. You're doing it again. His brow ticked upward. Doing what? That thing. I gestured vaguely, as if I could scoop the air between us into my palm, where you make me feel like the only person in the room. A quiet laugh escaped him, low and warm. Maybe you are. The words landed harder than they should have. I looked away, focusing on the flicker of the fire instead of the heat in his eyes. Jack, I said slowly, we've both got our lives now. I hesitated. We can't just pretend we're still those kids in the woods. I'm not pretending, he said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. That night, it never really left me. I felt it then, the years between us collapsing like pages turning too fast, the sound of leaves crunching under our feet, the cold night air catching in my throat, the warmth of his jacket when he pulled it around me, and his eyes, always his eyes. The rain grew heavier, a steady rhythm now, as if it had decided to score the scene for us. Jack leaned back just enough for the air to return between us. He studied me like he was memorizing something, maybe for the second time in his life. You don't have to decide anything tonight, he said. I just needed you to know. It was a gift and a burden, all in one. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I wanted to step closer or run before the pull became too strong to resist. But my hand stayed in his, and that said more than my mouth was ready to admit. The knock came like a small explosion in the quiet, sharp, unexpected, and far too real. Jack's gaze flicked to the door, but his hand stayed in mine for a moment longer, as if he didn't quite trust himself to let go. Then, reluctantly, he did. Were you expecting someone? I asked. He shook his head, jaw tightening. Not tonight. The rain was still heavy, but the knocking came again. 3 quick raps this time. Whoever it was didn't seem like they'd go away. Jack rose from the couch, his shadow stretching across the warm glow of the room. I stayed where I was, watching the way his shoulders moved, the way his head tilted slightly as he reached for the handle. When the door swung open, the wind rushed in, carrying with it a damp chill and the scent of pine from the hills. On the porch stood a man I'd never seen before, tall, weathered face, eyes that didn't settle anywhere for long. Jack Dempsey? The man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Who's asking? Jack replied, his tone a shade colder than I'd heard all night. The man's eyes shifted toward me, and I caught something, just a flicker, in his expression. Recognition? Curiosity? I couldn't tell. Name's Cole, he said finally. I think we need to talk. It's about your brother. Jack stiffened. My brother's dead. Cole didn't flinch. Yeah, I know. A strange, heavy silence filled the doorway. I felt it press against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. Jack stepped aside, but only just enough. You'd better come in. As Cole crossed the threshold, the world outside seemed to blur into nothing but darkness and rain, and I had the uneasy feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be simple or clean. Cole didn't sit right away. He stood near the doorway, dripping rainwater onto Jack's hardwood floor, his eyes scanning the room like he was checking for exits or threats. Jack moved to the mantel, leaning one hand against it. Say what you came to say, Cole. Cole's gaze flicked toward me again. She should probably leave. My chest tightened. I'm right here. Whatever you need to say, you can say it in front of me. Jack glanced at me, and for a split second I saw it, hesitation, but then he nodded toward Cole. Go on. Cole exhaled, slow and controlled, before speaking. Your brother, before he died, he left something behind, something people might kill for, and I'm guessing you've got it, whether you know it or not. Jack's voice was quiet but hard-edged. You're wrong. Am I? Cole tilted his head, studying Jack. Because the last time I saw him alive, he gave me a name, yours, and another one. His eyes moved to me. Savannah Hale. The sound of my name in his voice felt like a drop of ice down my spine. I don't know your brother, I said, but my voice came out softer than I meant. I've never even... Cole cut me off. You sure about that? People forget things, or they think they do. Jack stepped forward, the tension in him almost humming. Cole, you've made your point. Now tell me what you really want. Cole's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. I want to make sure it doesn't end for you the way it ended for him. That's going to mean digging up things you might wish stayed buried. He finally took a seat, dripping cotonal, and for the first time since he arrived, he looked tired. The rain battered the windows, louder now, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. Whatever Cole knew, whatever Jack wasn't saying, it was already too late to walk away. For a long moment, after Cole's words faded, no one spoke. The only sound was the rain, steady and relentless, as though the world outside was trying to wash something clean, and failing. Jack sat heavily in the chair across from Cole, elbows on his knees, and he didn't look at me. Savannah, you should go upstairs. This isn't... I'm not leaving. My voice came out sharper than I expected. If this is about me, if someone used my name, I have the right to know. Cole's eyes flickered toward me again, that unsettling mix of curiosity and calculation. She's got a point, Jack. Jack closed his eyes briefly, like he was counting to 10 in his head. When he opened them again, his voice was quieter. I told you my brother and I weren't close. That wasn't the whole truth. There was a stretch, 2 years maybe, when we were both into something we had no business touching, something that didn't just disappear when we walked away. Cole leaned back, arms crossed. He's talking about the job. Don't, Jack warned. But Cole ignored him. It wasn't legal, Savannah, and it wasn't small. Your name showed up on something from back then, something the wrong people still want. I swallowed hard. You're saying your brother knew me, or thought he did? Jack's gaze finally met mine. I don't know. I didn't recognize your name until the night you showed up here, and even then, I wasn't sure. Something inside me twisted. Then why keep me here? Because if my brother was right, you're in the middle of something dangerous, whether you remember it or not. Cole spoke up, voice low but insistent. And if I'm right, they already know where to find you. The room seemed to shrink around us, air thick with unasked questions. I didn't remember Jack's brother. I didn't remember any job, legal or not. But deep down, a small, stubborn part of me wondered if forgetting was a choice I'd made a long time ago. Jack stood, running a hand over his face. We can talk about it more tomorrow. For now, Savannah, I want you to get some rest. Cole, you can take the couch. Cole smirked faintly. Sure thing, but if they come tonight, don't say I didn't warn you. I went upstairs, but I didn't sleep. Because now the question wasn't just what Jack was hiding, it was what I might have been hiding from myself. The house had its own kind of silence at night, thick, almost deliberate. Every creak of the floorboards felt like it carried for miles. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the wind nudge the old shutters. Sleep wasn't even close to finding me. My mind was still replaying every word from downstairs like a tape that couldn't stop rewinding. At some point, I heard the faintest rumble of voices beneath me. I crept toward the door, easing it open until the hinges complained. The hallway was dark except for the dim amber light spilling from the stairwell. Barefoot, I moved down one step at a time, pressing close to the wall. Jack's voice came first, low and tight. You can't just tell her everything, Cole. You don't know what that'll do. Cole's reply was calmer, but it had that needling edge. What it'll do, or what it'll make her remember? A pause. I could almost hear Jack's jaw clench. She's not like the others, Jack said finally. She doesn't deserve to get dragged back into that mess. Cole laughed under his breath. And you think keeping her in the dark is gonna save her? You're still protecting someone who might not be who you think she is. My stomach tightened. Jack stepped closer to him. I could tell from the change in his tone. I'm protecting her because I was there, Cole. I know what went down. I know who was there that night. Cole's voice softened, almost curious. Do you? Another long silence. Then Cole said something that made my skin prickle. Jack. If she's who I think she is, she didn't just get caught up in it. She started it. I froze, gripping the banister, afraid even my breathing would give me away. Jack didn't answer right away. When he finally did, it was barely above a whisper. That's not true. But the way he said it didn't sound like he believed it. I backed away slowly, heart pounding in my ears. Whatever had happened between them in the past, whatever I'd supposedly been part of, it wasn't just dangerous. It was personal. By morning, I'd convinced myself I'd dreamt half of what I heard. It was easier than facing the possibility that both men thought I had blood on my hands. But easier didn't last long. The way Jack avoided my eyes at breakfast was almost worse than what I'd overheard. He set my coffee down without looking at me, mumbling something about needing to check the fence line. Cole had already disappeared. I sat there, fingers curling around the mug, waiting for the quiet to settle. When it did, it was the kind of quiet that felt like an invitation. If Jack didn't want me to know the truth, then it meant there was one to find. His office was on the second floor, tucked behind a heavy oak door that didn't match the rest of the house. The doorknob turned easier than I expected, like he never imagined I'd try it. Inside, the air was cooler, shadowed. Papers were stacked in neat piles on the desk, an old typewriter sitting off to one side like a relic. And then there was the drawer. It was locked, but not in any serious way. One of those tiny brass locks you could open with a paperclip. I stood there for a moment, hearing my heartbeat in my ears, and then found one in the desk's pencil cup. The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside were photographs, some old, some newer. Most were of people I didn't know, but one stopped me cold. It was a picture of me. Not me here, not me now. This was from years ago. I was standing on a street I didn't recognize, wearing a denim jacket I'd long since lost. There were two men in the background, faces blurred by motion, but something about their posture felt wrong. Tucked behind the photo was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. 3 words stared back at me in Jack's handwriting. Do not forget. My hands shook as I slid everything back, exactly how I'd found it, but the words burned themselves into my mind. Jack hadn't just known me before I came here. He'd been watching me. And whatever he thought I'd forgotten, maybe I was better off not remembering. I didn't go looking for Jack, not right away. Instead, I waited for Cole. He came back just before sundown, boots caked with dried mud, jacket half zipped against the chill. The sight of him used to make me feel steadier. Now it just made me curious, dangerously curious. He caught me in the kitchen, reaching for a glass of water. You've been quiet, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. So have you. The silence stretched. Then I said, Cole, what happened that night? He froze, fingers drumming on the countertop. What night? The one you and Jack were talking about. The one you think I don't remember. For a second, he almost spoke. I could see it, the way his mouth opened, the flicker in his eyes like the words were already there, perched on the edge of breaking free. It's not my place, he said finally, voice tight. You'd have to ask Jack. Then tell me this. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Was it his fault or mine? Cole's jaw worked like he was chewing down something bitter. I don't think fault is the right word. Then what is? Survival, he said. He started to turn away, but then hesitated, looking back. It wasn't just you and Jack that night. His brother was there too. I didn't even know Jack had a brother. Before I could press him, Cole walked out the back door into the dark, leaving me with a whole new question. If Jack's brother was there, then what happened to him? The library was quiet that morning, too quiet for my pulse. Old paper, dust, and the faint hum of the heating system surrounded me as I scrolled through the microfilm machine. It didn't take long to find it. Local man reported missing after motel fire. The headline was dated 14 years ago. The photo was grainy, but I could still make out the sharp jawline. the familiar set of the eyes. Jack's brother, Ethan Klein. The article said he'd been staying at the Old Pines Motel on the edge of county line when a fire broke out just after midnight. Several rooms were destroyed. One body was recovered, badly burned, but never formally identified. Ethan was never found. My hands tightened around the edges of the newspaper copy. Why hadn't Jack ever told me? Why hadn't anyone? I checked the weathered county archive binder for the fire marshal's report, page after page of smudged photocopies, until I found a small note in the margins, handwritten by someone at the time. Room 6 was gutted first, accelerant used, arson likely. The librarian, Mrs. Dalton, peeked over the counter, curiosity in her eyes. Looking for something in particular? History project, I lied. Old fires in the area. She nodded but didn't look convinced. That one still makes folks uneasy. Nobody ever got charged, and that motel burned down but the land never sold. Folks say it's cursed. Cursed or not, I knew where I was going next. The Old Pines Motel site was 30 minutes out, along a road that wound past bare winter fields and skeletal tree lines. As I drove, my mind replayed Cole's words. It wasn't just you and Jack that night. His brother was there too. Was he talking about the same night as the fire? And if so, what the hell was I doing there? When I pulled up, the land was nothing but a flat stretch of cracked concrete and weeds. A half-burned sign still hung from one rusted pole, letters barely legible, ODPIEM Tell. The air smelled faintly of ash, even after all these years. And then I saw them. 2 sets of boot prints in the dirt, fresh, leading toward the far end of the lot. Someone had been here, recently. The boot prints cut through the frost like a breadcrumb trail. They were deep enough to be recent, yesterday, maybe even this morning. Every instinct in me said turn around. Every stubborn part of me said keep going. The far end of the motel lot was overgrown, weeds taller than my knees. Beyond them, a jagged outline of what must have been the old laundry building sagged against the gray sky. That's where the prints stopped. I stepped inside, crunching broken tile under my boots. The place smelled like mildew and burnt wood. A beam of winter light filtered through a collapsed section of roof, spotlighting something out of place. A half-buried metal box. I crouched, brushing away dirt and char. It wasn't big, about the size of a shoebox, heavy as a cinder block. The lid had a small padlock, rusted but intact. I yanked it, but it didn't budge. A sudden thought hit me. There was a tire iron in my trunk. 10 minutes later, with numb fingers and a few muttered curses, I snapped the lock. The lid groaned open, and my breath caught. Inside were 3 things. First, a charred leather wallet, edges singed but contents mostly intact. I opened it to find a faded driver's license, Ethan Klein. Second, a Polaroid. Me, 17 years old, laughing. And Jack, his arms slung around me, his face shadowed. I had no memory of that picture ever being taken. Third, a folded piece of motel stationery. The paper was brittle, but I could still make out the handwriting. Room 6, midnight, don't tell her. Her, me. A sudden noise, wood splintering, echoed from behind the building. I slammed the lid shut, heart pounding. Someone else was here. The sound came again, closer this time. A deliberate crunch of boots in the frost. I gripped the lockbox like it was a shield, pulse roaring in my ears. Savannah? The voice stopped me cold. It wasn't just familiar, it was impossible. I turned. Micah Dempsey stood in the doorway, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes darting around like he was checking for shadows. He looked older than the boy I remembered, beard scruff, lines at the corners of his eyes. But the shape of him, the way he stood, it all came rushing back. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, though my voice came out as more of a whisper. He stepped forward, glancing down at the open lockbox. "You shouldn't have found that." The air between us tightened. "You knew about this?" He swallowed hard, like he was choosing every word with care. "I've been keeping an eye on this place, making sure certain people stay away from it, but if they find out you've been poking around..." He stopped, jaw clenching. You need to leave, Savannah. I shook my head. You show up out of nowhere, after years, and you think you can just tell me to walk away? No, you're going to tell me what's going on. His gaze softened, but there was something under it. Fear. You don't understand. They're still here. The ones who were here that night. I gripped the Polaroid tighter. That night? My voice was sharper now. Micah, what do you know about Ethan Klein? His eyes flicked toward the broken window, like he expected someone to be watching. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Ethan wasn't supposed to die. The words hit like a fist. Before I could ask anything else, Micah's hand closed over mine, firm and urgent. Please, just get in your car, drive south, don't look back. If you stay, you'll end up like him. I wanted to demand answers, to shake the truth out of him, but the sound of another pair of footsteps outside made us both freeze. Micah's grip tightened. They're here. Micah didn't waste another second. He yanked the chain on his flashlight, plunging us into pitch black, and hissed, Follow me. Quiet. I could barely see him, just the outline of his shoulders against the faint silver light leaking through the cracked windows. The footsteps outside were getting closer. 2 sets, moving slow, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. Micah led me to the far corner of the laundry room, where a warped wooden door sat half buried in shadows. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Basement exit, he whispered. It comes up behind the storage sheds. We can use the trees for cover. He pressed down on the rusted latch, but it wouldn't budge. The metal squealed just loud enough to make my heart slam in my chest. A voice from outside floated through the cracked window, low, male, and calm. She's in there. I told you she'd come back. Micah's eyes darted to mine in the dark. There was no time to question how they knew me. No time for anything. He gave the latch one more violent shove, and it finally popped open with a muted snap. The air that rushed out was colder, thicker, and carried a faint smell of damp concrete and something metallic. Micah motioned for me to go first. I hesitated. What if they see us? He glanced over his shoulder toward the window, where a shadow now moved across the glass. They already know we're here. Move. I dropped into the narrow stairwell, boots clanging against the steel steps before I forced myself to slow down. Micah followed, closing the door above us until the basement swallowed us in darkness. It wasn't silent. Water dripped somewhere deep inside, and our footsteps echoed too loudly off the stone walls. Micah kept his hand on my back, guiding me around corners, down a short hallway, and toward a square of faint moonlight at the far end. We reached a low opening covered by a sheet of plywood. Micah lifted it just enough to peek out, then froze. What? I breathed. They're already at the sheds. Micah lowered the plywood slowly, his jaw tightening. They've cut us off, he whispered. We can't go up there now. I swallowed hard, the air in the basement feeling colder with every second. Then, what? We're trapped? Micah didn't answer right away. He paced a short stretch of the wall, running his hands along the rough brick like he was searching for something. This building's older than most people think, he muttered. Some of these places were built on top of service tunnels, boiler rooms, coal chutes, old storm drains, stuff they never tore out. I stayed quiet, trying to hear past the pounding in my own ears. Above us, faint creaks sounded through the floorboards. The men were inside now. Micah's hand stopped on a patch of brick that sounded different when he tapped it. Hollow. Here, he said, bracing his shoulder and shoving. The section of wall shifted just enough to reveal a narrow passage. It smelled of rust and stale air, the kind of scent that made you want to hold your breath. Micah flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust like a blade. We stepped inside, and the wall slid back behind us with a dull thud. The darkness ahead seemed endless, the floor damp under our boots. This isn't on any map, Micah said softly. That's good for us, but bad if we don't know where it comes out. I glanced over my shoulder. the weight of the sealed wall behind us pressing in. At least they can't follow. Micah shook his head. They can follow. The question is if they will. Somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a metallic clang echoed, too far away to place but close enough to make my stomach twist. Micah stopped mid-step. They're not the only ones who know about this route. We froze. The clang wasn't just some echo from the city above. It had rhythm, metal against stone. A pause. Then again. Micah's flashlight beam trembled slightly as he turned it down the tunnel. The light caught on something ahead, a faint shimmer like water, but then it shifted, blocking the glow. "Who's there?" Micah called, his voice low but edged with warning. For a moment there was only silence. Then a man's voice came back, rough and worn. "Could ask you the same thing. This ain't your tunnel." He stepped into the light slowly. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. A gaunt face half hidden under a tattered beanie. One hand gripped a length of rusted pipe. The other was wrapped in a stained bandage. "This is a dead route," he said, glancing at me before locking eyes with Micah. "You keep going, you'll end up where the water runs black. And trust me, you don't want to be down there when the tide shifts." Micah didn't lower the flashlight. "You live down here?" The man gave a dry chuckle. "Live? No. Survive. Most days." I could feel something in his tone, a warning that wasn't just about bad plumbing. There was history in his eyes, the kind you don't get from just being unlucky. "You got people looking for you?" he asked suddenly. "Because I heard boots. Heavy ones. 2 sets. They ain't far behind." Micah took a slow breath. "Then maybe you could tell us where this tunnel does lead." The man's eyes flicked between us. "You want out, you follow me. You want trouble, you keep going straight. Choice is yours." Another clang echoed from the darkness behind us, closer this time. Micah didn't wait for my answer. "We'll follow." The man turned, his figure swallowed by the shadows ahead. I glanced at Micah. "Hope you know what you're doing." He didn't look at me. Neither do I. The stranger's pace was steady, almost measured, as if he knew every crack in the tunnel floor by heart. His shoulders were hunched against the damp, his boots making a dull scrape with each step. Micah and I kept close behind, the beam of our flashlight swinging over walls slick with condensation. Somewhere behind us, the faint thud of boots echoed. Slower now, but deliberate. "You got a name?" Micah asked. The man didn't turn his head. "Hollis," he said flatly. "You?" "Micah." A beat of silence. "This is Savannah." Hollis gave a small grunt, like our names were irrelevant but filed away anyway. We walked another 100 yards before the tunnel bent sharply to the right. The smell changed. Less mildew, more metallic. And under it all something faintly electric, like ozone before a storm. Hollis stopped at a heavy iron door that looked welded shut decades ago. He tapped it twice with his pipe. A muffled click came from the other side, and slowly, impossibly, the door swung inward. The space beyond was surreal. Dim bulbs strung across the ceiling, casting a golden glow over stacks of crates, a cot with threadbare blankets, and walls lined with maps covered in scribbles. "This is where you've been hiding?" I asked quietly. Hollis smirked. "I don't hide, I watch." Micah's eyes moved over the maps. One in particular caught his attention. It showed the city above, but with strange red lines cutting through it, marking paths that didn't exist on any official blueprint. "You've been tracking them," Micah said. Hollis didn't deny it. "They don't like folks knowing the underground better than they do. That's why I've lasted this long." I stepped closer. "Why help us?" Hollis studied me for a moment before answering. "Because I know the look of people who stumbled into something bigger than they planned, and because—" he hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I owe someone like you." The boots behind us sounded again, closer, louder, echoing off the tunnel walls. Hollis's smirk returned, but this time it was sharp-edged. guess story time's over. If you want to make it out of here, you're going to have to trust me." Hollis moved fast for a man who looked like he carried the weight of the earth on his back. He shut the iron door behind us without a sound, then ducked into a narrow slit between two stacks of crates. "This way," he said over his shoulder, his voice low, urgent. "Keep your lights off. You'll see soon enough." We squeezed into the hidden corridor, the air cooler, heavier. A faint, rhythmic drip echoed from somewhere ahead. The walls here were rough, not the brick of the city's tunnels, more like they'd been carved straight from bedrock. After maybe 30 yards, Hollis stopped, turned, and looked at Micah. "You know why I said you'd have to trust me." Micah frowned. "Because you think you can get us out." Hollis shook his head slowly. "No, because you're about to walk through a place that's killed better men than you, and the only way across is to follow my word, step by step. No questions, no hesitation." Something in Micah's posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed like he was trying to read between Hollis's words. "What's your angle?" Micah asked. Hollis's expression changed. A flicker of recognition, maybe even bitterness. "My angle," he said, "is that I knew your father. The silence that followed was thick. I could almost hear Micah's heartbeat in the dark." "You're lying," Micah finally said. "No," Hollis replied, his tone clipped. "I was with him the night he disappeared, and if you want the truth, you're going to have to survive the place we're headed to first." He turned again and started walking. The corridor sloped downward sharply now, and soon the floor beneath our boots wasn't stone anymore. It was a grid of old steel plates, slick with condensation. Beneath that grid, a hollow and the faint rush of water. "This is the first gate," Hollis said. "One wrong step, and the plates will drop." Micah glanced at me, his jaw tight but his eyes steady. I could see the storm building behind them, questions about his father, about why this stranger had chosen this moment to appear. Hollis raised one hand. "Left, forward, right, forward." We followed his voice, each step deliberate, the steel flexing faintly under our weight. The sound of the rushing water below grew louder, and the air thickened with mist. Halfway across, a distant clang rang out from behind us. Someone else was coming. Hollis's head snapped around, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Move," he barked. "Now." Micah and I didn't look back. We just moved, trusting the rhythm of Hollis's commands. By the time we reached solid ground, my legs felt like they might give out. Hollis put a hand on Micah's shoulder. "Your father didn't make it past the third gate. If you want to know why, you have to make it further than he did." The tunnel beyond the first gate narrowed until we had to turn sideways to fit. The air was dense and tasted faintly of rust, like breathing through a wet rag. Each breath pulled a whisper of panic closer. Hollis moved ahead, his shoulders scraping the rock. "This part isn't about balance," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the cramped space. "This one's about whether you can keep breathing when the air doesn't want you to." Micah glanced back at me. "You good?" I nodded, though my lungs were already working harder. The damp heat pressed against my skin, and the stone seemed to close in with every step. After 20 feet, we hit the choke point, a jagged crack in the wall barely wide enough for a person. Beyond it was nothing but darkness. Hollis crouched, his voice low. "You'll have to crawl. The ceiling dips to maybe 18 inches, and the air's thin on the other side. Once you go in, you can't stop moving. If you stall, you'll run out of air before you find the vent." Micah's jaw tightened. "How long?" 40, maybe 50 feet, Hollis said. "Your father made it 32 before he blacked out." The words hung there like a curse. I saw Micah's throat work as he swallowed them down. He went first, his boots disappearing into the slit. I followed, Hollis last. The rock scraped my elbows and ribs, and my breath sounded too loud in my own ears. Every inhale felt thinner than the last. Micah's voice came back in broken bursts. "Keep Right wall. I did, my palm trailing along the cold stone. The tunnel twisted and my lungs began to burn. A part of me wanted to stop. Just one deep breath. But Hollis's earlier warning rang in my head. The moment I thought I couldn't take another step, my hand brushed open air. A jagged hole in the ceiling. The vent. Cool, fresh air spilled down like salvation. Micah was there, bent over, hands on his knees, his breath coming in ragged pulls. Hollis emerged seconds later, his face unreadable in the dim light. "You made it further than he did," Hollis said quietly to Micah. "But the third gate, that's where the real choice comes." The chamber before the third gate was unlike anything we'd passed through. Not narrow, not suffocating, but open, almost cathedral-like. The ceiling rose high into blackness, and water dripped steadily from somewhere above, each drop echoing like a slow clock. A single stone arch stood at the far end. It wasn't built into the rock like the other gates. It looked placed here, deliberate. Symbols I couldn't read were carved deep into the stone, their edges worn smooth by time. Hollis stood before it, silent. For the first time since we entered these tunnels, he didn't move like a man guiding others. He moved like someone on holy ground. "This is it," he said finally. "The place where your father turned back. Or maybe where he disappeared. Depends on who you ask." Micah stepped forward, the torchlight catching the hard line of his jaw. "What's through there?" Hollis's eyes met his. Not a test of strength, not breath or balance or endurance. It's a choice, and whatever you choose, you can't unchoose it. He turned to me. "You too. It's not a one-person door. If one of you walks through, you both do." The air shifted, not colder, but heavier, like it carried a weight that had nothing to do with stone. Micah glanced back at me, his voice low. "You don't have to do this." I swallowed. "What's on the other side?" Hollis didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Some say it shows you the thing you've been running from. Others say it gives you what you want most. But in both stories, the price is the same. You never leave the way you came in." Micah looked at the arch again, and I could see the pull in him, like he was hearing something I couldn't. "What if we just don't?" I asked. "Then you'll always wonder," Hollis said. "And wondering is its own kind of prison." The three of us stood there, the steady drip of water marking the seconds, until Micah took a slow breath. "I need to know." He looked at me, not asking but hoping. I stepped beside him. "Then I guess I do too." Hollis nodded once, then reached out and touched the arch. A low vibration hummed through the stone, and somewhere deep in the tunnel behind us, I thought I heard the sound of something closing. "You walk through," Hollis said quietly, "and the third gate will decide if you leave." We stepped forward together, the air thickening with each step. It felt like walking through water. Not resistance exactly, but a slow pull that wanted to hold us in place. Micah's torch flickered, the flame stretching long, then collapsing in on itself until we were left in darkness. But it wasn't empty darkness. Shapes began to form, not stone walls, not the damp floor beneath our boots, but a narrow kitchen, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, the smell of coffee and something sweet in the oven. Micah froze. "This is my mother's kitchen," he whispered, and standing by the counter, younger than I'd ever seen him, was his father, alive, laughing, a man whole, unbroken. Micah took a step forward, but Hollis's voice came from behind us, firm, almost sharp. "Careful, it's showing you what you want. It's not the same as what is." I looked around, and then I saw my want, a porch in late summer, my sister sitting on the steps, the one I hadn't seen since she left. Her hair caught the light just right, and when she saw me, she smiled like no time had passed. The pull between us and those visions was unbearable. Micah's hand twitched at his side. I could feel my own feet shifting toward the porch. "This is the price," Hollis said, his voice lower now. You can have it, but you stay. The gate closes behind you, forever. Micah's breathing had gone uneven. I could have him back. I looked at my sister. I could stop feeling alone. Hollis stepped closer. You could also lose the chance to live the rest of your life, not just to remember it, but to be in it. Micah turned to me. We could stay. I shook my head, tears burning hot. If we stay, we stop moving. And if we stop moving, we stop finding out what's real. For a long, painful moment, I thought he might choose differently. But then, with a ragged exhale, he reached for my hand. The visions shimmered, their edges breaking apart like smoke in wind. The porch, the kitchen, the people we'd lost, all dissolved into the darkness again. We were back at the stone arch, the humming gone. Somewhere far above us, I felt the faintest breath of fresh air. Hollis studied us, a strange pride in his eyes. You walked through, and you walked out. We didn't say anything. We just followed the sound of that air step by step until the tunnel gave way to night sky. The stars overhead felt impossibly sharp, like they'd been waiting for us. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we'd made the harder choice. The one that hurt now, but might save us later.